Chapter 270 to 273. Surely all of you are wondering. Why have I gathered you all here? Said Broly with his classic evil smile while materializing a throne in which he sat and looked from the heights all the beings in that almost empty dimension as if they were mere insects. No one known exactly what this strange character was doing or why, however, an unbreakable and immutable rule in this reality was verified again. The Universe 7 is creating problems again. All the gods and angels said at the same time except those of Universe 7, who didn't even pay attention to them. All his senses were focused on the greatest enigma of all the universes, their trump card and time bomb. A time bomb that looked like it was about to explode. Was he the one who brought us all here together? What the hell is he talking about? Asked almost all the participants with a lot of confusion. They had supposedly been recruited by the Hakashin, Kaioshin, and Tenshin from their respective universes to fight in a martial arts tournament presided over Zeno-sama. They haven't told them everything? Had they misunderstood something? However, those who attended the meeting in which the tournament was created had no doubts that Guy has lost his mind. During the meeting Broly showed them that he had an immeasurable ego. He seemed to think that he was the best in absolutely everything. However, they believed there was a limit. The limit of declaring himself king of all creation versus the true king of all creation. Limit that had been broken right now. Even the organizer of the tournament had serious doubts. The rules we imposed say that participants cannot fly. And Broly is a participant. Why can he fly? Asked Zeno to Daishinkan, waiting an answer that would explain what trick Broly was using to fly. I don't know, your majesty. Answered Daishinkan, which erased from his face his usual smile full of condescension. His surprise and disbelief were even higher than those of the others. Unlike them, he knew that what Broly was doing was totally impossible. What? Shouted almost everyone. Daishinkans, probably the most intelligent, wise, and capable of all, didn't know what was happening. This answer and facial expression completely changed the mentality of all the attendees, especially that gods and angels. This was no longer a joke or a delusion of Broly, something big was happening. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Wise, is time to panic and say we were right? Asked Beerus, with obvious concern, horror, and relief. I think so. Answered Wise, which was in the same situation as Beerus. Both were theorizing for years that Broly was up to something extremely big and dangerous. However, they didn't know exactly what he was planning, nor did they have conclusive evidence whether he was really planning anything. Sometimes they even deeply doubted about their own judgment and believed that their malevolent perception of Broly was based on misunderstandings. However, right now, they could very surely state that they weren't crazy. Broly was revealing his evil plan to all the universes. Broly, His Majesty would like to know why you are able to fly here when it's forbidden, asked Daishinkan, trying to control this unexpected and unstable situation that he still didn't understand in the most cordial way possible. However, Broly had already feigned too much cordiality in front of him, and the moment of pretending was over, because I can do whatever I want. I don't need approval from anyone. And that includes you, of course. A response that again provoked a general scream. This Broly. He has gone crazy, shouted almost all the Hakashins and Kaioshins. Zeno-sama has no mercy on them when they say something he doesn't like or answer in a way that he doesn't approve of. Did that mortal think he was different from them? I don't like when someone don't follow the rules, said Zeno, quite upset with everything Broly was doing and saying. Rules? That doesn't apply to me, dwarf. Now shut up, this is my party, not yours. Shouted Broly, completely despising Zeno while showing him a certain finger. Thus creating an even greater and louder general scream. No way. He did it. He did it. He did it. Broly had insulted Zeno-sama. He no longer had salvation. There was no turning back. Broly had dug his own grave and shitted on it. You have made me angry, said Zeno, extremely angry as he raised his hand. He raised his open hand to realize his ability to erase things from existence. It was as if time stopped, just like everyone's breathing, because once his hand was closed, Broly, a living being like them, would disappear forever without being able to oppose any kind of resistance. And Zeno's hand was beginning to close, be gone. This was the end of Broly. However, Nani. Nobody understood why. Have you finished, stupid Stewie? Broly was still there. Impossible. Nanny? What happened? Why don't you disappear? Zeno said, totally perplexed as he tried over and over again to make Broly disappear. Be gone. 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 Be goonie. However, all that was useless. Broly was still there without even flinching. Ha 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 ha. No matter how many times you try. I have already told you. You have no power over my dwarf. Said Broly, still sitting on his throne while filing his nails. Be goonie. Be goonie. Be goonie. No matter how many times Zeno closed and opened his hand, Broly was still there, laughing at him and challenging his authority. That's impossible. I am the king of all. Said Zeno, about to have a nervous breakdown while spreading his arms. And since that didn't work, Zeno was forced to use more drastic methods. Oh no. That stance. Shouted all the inhabitants of Universe 7 who attended the tournament, shouted upon see what Zeno-sama was doing. That was the ability with which Zeno completely destroyed Trunks' timeline. Oh no. Zeno-sama is going to destroy everything. Shouted all the gods, angels, and mortals who knew what was happening. Everyone is going to die in order to kill Broly. However, that didn't impress Broly, who was watching the show from his throne while eating peanuts and saying, I see. If he can't destroy me individually, he resorts to destroying absolutely everything. It's quite logical. Although not everyone, or rather, no one observed this event from his complacent point of view. Damn you, Universe 7. Shouted all the gods that didn't belong to the Universe 7. Damn you, Broly. Shouted all the inhabitants of Universe 7 who attended the tournament. Everyone cursed him for extremely obvious reasons. Everything was going to disappear because of him. Beerus's theory then was true. Broly had been the cause of the destruction of this universe in the future. This present. This was the end of everything. Be gone. Be gone. However, Nanny. Nobody understood why. We are still alive, but how? Nothing disappeared again, except. Have you never heard that two equal forces repel each other? Said Broly, pointing to Zeno's side. Broly was pointing at the Zeno from the future, who was performing the same posture than his other self, since he had performed exactly the same technique at the same time. What's going on? The Zeno-sama from the future has cancelled the erasure of the present Zeno-sama? Shouted Daishinkan, who was finding it impossible to stay calm, like everyone was shedding cold sweat from his pores, but unlike the others, this was the first time in his long life that something like that happened. That's right, the future Zeno stopped Zeno's apocalypse using exactly the same ability, an ability with the same frequency, used at the same time with the same power. Thanks to the Zeno of the future, everyone had been saved, something that shocked everyone either by the method used, the reason, the result, and the implications. However, the most shocked of all was Zeno. Why? Why did you do that? Asked Zeno to his future self. Why would he sabotage himself? This was impossible. Both are the same. They should agree on everything, as they have always been until now. Because he had stopped him when he was about to finish off Broly? Because that's what I've been told to do. Right, Broly-sama? Answered future Zeno, waving to Broly energetically, as if he were a child waiting for his father's approval and congratulations. And obviously Broly, who had his paternal senses extremely developed the day his son was born, word to Zeno, that's right, Zeno-chan, you're a very good lackey. Sit down and enjoy, and of course make sure your past self doesn't get into my party again. Yes, sir. Future Zeno replied energetically while, on his forehead, a luminous mark began to become visible to everyone. A greenish mark in the shape of a third eye suspiciously similar to Broly's, which shone more and more powerfully every second. Ag! Shouted some of the gods, who fainted after their brain was figuratively liquidated. At this point, it wasn't difficult to interpret what was happening. Broly at some point managed to brainwash the Zeno-sama of the future, turning him into a loyal slave who was grateful to the same person who enslaved him. Broly had turned Zeno-sama, the most powerful, invincible, and invulnerable being of all creation, into his puppet, his pet, his little whore. Something had just happened that no one thought was possible. What's happening? I don't understand. Why? Why? Babbled Zeno, retracing his steps and moving as far as possible from his other self while his royal guards and Daishinkan looked at him without knowing what to do or say to him. From the moment of his birth, Zeno-sama never had anything to worry about. He had always had what he had wanted, the existence of the universes and their gods were nothing more than a whim, simple entertainment methods to cope with his infinite time. He had always been invulnerable, invincible, and omnipotent. Nothing could do anything to him and everything that could upset him tried not to be, or else it was eliminated. Nothing was a problem for him and if something could become a problem, his lackeys made sure that it wasn't. Everything revolved around him, everyone paid homage to him, nothing could oppose him, everything always went the way he wanted. However, everything changed today. A mere mortal born in one of the universes he played with opposed him and he couldn't eliminate him. That was totally impossible. He could and should eliminate anything he wanted. This is the reality of him. Everything should be as he wanted. But Broly wasn't like the others, he couldn't do anything against him. He's out of his control. And that wasn't all. He had just seen how his other self, the other most invulnerable being in all creation, was being controlled in some way by the person to whom he couldn't do anything. Something incomprehensible was happening, both in this tournament and in his own body. At this moment his chest ached, partly due to the rapid heartbeat, which had never been so accelerated. He was sweating from all the pores of his body and the chills that he felt were making him shiver all over his body, until he lost control of his motor skills. He has never felt like this. He didn't understand what was happening or what was happening to him. And in this case, Broly was willing to resolve his doubts. Can you feel it, Zeno-chan? This is fear. Ha 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 ha. Fear? This was an almost unknown word to Zeno. Since the day he was born, he had never had the need to be afraid. Nothing could harm him, nothing could affect him, nothing could provoke him, nothing could contradict him. He was like a rich child and pampered to the extreme by his parents who believed himself invulnerable, to be the center and reason for the existence of the universe, because that was how he had been shown since he was born. Until one day, he discovered after stumbling and falling to the ground that he wasn't inviolable, that he wasn't invincible, that he was no longer the center of the universe or the reason for all existence. He could die too. He was no different from other mortals. His death could be too close. And that terrified him. No. No. Help. Help. Shouted Zeno, pleading to the guards and Daishinkan like a scared and vulnerable child unable to do anything against an extremely large, dangerous, and intimidating world. Protect His Majesty. Now. Shouted Daishinkan, standing between Zeno, future Zeno, and Broly. Daishinkan was more serious than he had ever been, ready to fight at any moment and without taking his eyes off Broly for a second, just like Zeno's guards, who protected him as they had never done before, not only from Broly, but also from the other Zeno, whom they also served. This was the reaction that Broly expected, for which he said with great humor, "Well, I see that I already have your attention. We could start my show now. However, I guess you want to ask a question first. Right, Whis? Since when have you been planning all this?" Said Whis, who stood among all the angels, to ask the question that he had rehearsed so many times in his mind. "Even before my birth," answered Broly, answering the question that he always wanted to answer. "Before he was born," shouted almost everyone upon hearing that absurdity. Okay, they were talking about the guy who was immune to Zeno's erasure and who was dominating future Zeno, but planning all of this inside the placenta seemed extreme even to him. However, Kompa, Shin, Vados, and especially Wise believed they understood the subtext behind that statement. "So you lied when you said you weren't a time traveler?" Once again, the theory that Broly had traveled to the past and introduced his soul into little Broly's body was plausible. "No, I have never lied about that. My first time travel was done recently. And it was to beat Zamasu, and other things." "Hee," answered Broly, refuting their theory about the time traveler, Broly, that possesses the body of babies. That completely confused the deities of Universe 6 and 7. If this theory, the most coherent theory, that could explain everything that happened until now, and Broly's statement is not correct. Which is the correct one? Was Broly lying to them? Did he lie when he said that he had planned this since before he was born? But why would he lie to them now? That's why they tried to ask, "So how is it? You think you know everything about the universes and dimensions, and that you are on top of all creation. However, You are but one among the infinite realities that this omniverse encompasses," said Broly, interrupting their question to answer in a very ambiguous way to create more questions than answers in their already confused brains. Other realities? Omniverse? However, these two concepts created a great alarm in certain people. "Who the hell are you, Broly, and what do you want?" said Daishinkan, who began to understand that the situation was even more dangerous than they thought. And of course, Broly has no problem explaining the culmination of his plan. "I see you want explanations. I don't know if I should explain it, but... well, I will be polite and give you this reward." I'm sure he's been preparing this speech for years, thought all those who knew Broly's the personality. He's a narcissistic megalomaniac bastard who loves to hear himself talking about himself and see the surprised faces of everyone when he do or say something incredible. Of course he wanted to explain everything even if he hadn't been asked. So Broly started explaining his story from the beginning. "One day, due to fate, I had the opportunity to be reborn in this reality, in this timeline. And not in just any body, I was able to choose the one that I liked the most and even make modifications to it to my liking. And of course, as in all manga or anime, people in the audience began to speak and theorize without hearing the whole story." "I see. That explains why the Brolys on the alternate timelines are different," said Shin, who saw the other Brolys without a third eye on the other timelines. "So, he's someone from another reality who possessed a Broly, or whatever it's called, from our specific timeline? If so, it's true that he didn't travel in time." We didn't even think about that possibility," said Vados, which understood why Broly technically didn't lie to them years ago. All their questions were focused on knowing if Broly was a time traveler or not, so he always told them the truth on this matter. However, there were two things that didn't fit despite that, and Wise wanted to know why. "That explains how you could evade some of our questions. However, what the omniscient Zeno told us didn't. I forced Zeno to work for me some minutes before you audience with him, therefore, he told you what I told him to say. But let's not anticipate events, I am still explaining what happened on the planet Vegeta," said Broly, interrupting Y's speech just like he interrupted him and replaying the projection of his life history with his third eye, maybe one of his favorite skills. "Damn bastard!" shouted Kampa with great indignation. That son of a bitch knew that they were going to ask him and he ripped them off a second time after using the Dragon Balls to deceive them. Even his brother agreed with him. Yes, he fooled us like idiots all this time. And I'm afraid he also did the same with the story of the time lock. Meanwhile, Broly continued to explain his story. "After manipulating the entire planet from the shadows in my incubator, thanks to my psychic powers, I managed to build my spaceship to leave that garbage dump. But not before meeting the god of destruction Beerus, who would come to the planet Vegeta surely to destroy it due to King Vegeta incompetence. It wasn't 100% necessary to meet him, but if I had a chance to fight him a bit it would save me training time in the future. In addition, I knew perfectly how to influence him to help me in my purpose." "Is he talking about the food?" asked Beerus to Wise, a little embarrassed for being so predictable. "Yes, is the food," answered Wise, who shared the same feeling. Moreover, the film continued. "After that I emigrated to planet Earth, where I live now, an incredible place where there are Dragon Balls and a very nice kami, which I exploited to the maximum for years to increase my power, skills, and knowledge," said Broly, freezing the image in a photo of Kami, Mr. Popo, and him when he was a kid. Broly was very happy as he grabbed the two of them by the shoulder to take that picture, however Kami and Mr. Popo seemed to be very uncomfortable. And of course, Piccolo, who carried the memories and essence of the late Kami, said those were horrible days. A comment that Broly ignored to continue with the next part of his story. "And once I was ready, I used the Dragon Balls from planet Namek to travel to Universe 6 to get the latest Super Dragon Balls. Yes, these Dragon Balls, the ones you can see on my right. Which I used to make a somewhat special wish that you will soon have the opportunity to know. And that's when my nightmare began," said Kampa, remembering bitterly how he met Broly. "I've been insisting for years. The Dragon Balls twist the natural order of everything," said Fuwa, another of the deities that suffered at the hands of Broly when he came to tour the Universe 6 in search of Dragon Balls. "Although I didn't just look for the Super Dragon Balls, no. During my visit, I also got other pieces of my great puzzle, such as my transformations, the Hakai energy thanks to Kampa, and among many other things, the pod era of a Supreme Kaioshin Fuwa, which were undoubtedly very helpful in perfecting my multiplication and fusion techniques. Without forgetting of course that these earrings helped me a lot a few hours ago, When all the gods were watching me fight, Broly said, this time with a more malevolent smile than usual as he showed images of different Brolys traveling to the planets of different Supreme Kais. What? Shouted all the Supreme Kaishans in the tournament upon seeing that the greatest monster that had existed in the universe was trespassing in his house to do something very bad. These images were certainly disturbing and even criminals. However, what does this have to do with the pod era of a Supreme Kai and the... Oh no! Shouted Gaosu, the Supreme Kai of the Universe 10 and the ex-sensei of Zamasu, who was able to relate both concepts due to a recent bad experience. Don't tell me that when we were in the meeting you stole our time rings, and... Gun. Ding dong. We'll get to that point later. Said Broly, interrupting Gaosu's correct deduction with a gong that had just materialized. So after a silence in which all the gods and angels avoided asking questions about what Gaosu was about to say, Broly continued, later I managed to assimilate Bu, further increasing my arsenal of mind-blowing powers. And due to a set of misunderstandings, the deities of universes 6 and 7, except Beerus, who was sleeping, almost uncovered, albeit by mistake, that I was plotting what you see I was plotting. Basically Whis and Vados mistakenly believed that I was an evil time traveler and that in some way I prevent time travels to the future. It was you, right? How did you do it? Shouted Shin, interrupting for the umpteenth time. Something that was starting to irritate Broly. The questions for later. I'm trying to sum up almost 50 years, well, actually millions, of my life. Be patient, or else I'll have to sew your mouth, literally, said Broly, materializing a thread and a needle that was burning with a lighter to disinfect it. So upon seeing that no one asked him anything else or obvious reasons, Broly continued with his monologue. When they tried to capture me, I beat up Kompa and continued to invent alibis, twist reality, choose the questions that would be answered and coerce and brainwash their informant. So I was declared innocent of some crimes that I hadn't committed, of others that I hadn't yet committed, and of others that I did commit. Said Broly, this time projecting over and over again the combat that he and Kompa had, in which an elementary school boy humiliatingly beat up a Hakashan with thousands of years of experience. A rather humiliating feature film for Kompa, which the other Hakashans took advantage of and gladly made fun of him. He, pathetic. He didn't beat me up. I let him win so I could. Besides, he caught me by surprise. Shouted Kompa, who didn't know very well how to defend himself. He was humiliated by a toddler. And although Whis was still suspicious of me, and I knew that he was still suspicious of me, both tried to feign ignorance. What he didn't know is that part of me had already fled from this reality and had entered other different realities in which I acquired great power-ups, allies, and my own reality. An infinite reality made with different laws than this reality. And I am the very embodiment of those laws, said Broly again, projecting on dozens of screens his adventures in the main reality, the other realities of the Shonen Jump, and in another that doesn't belong to the Shonen Jump. And thanks to that auditory and visual explanation, Daishinkan was finally able to understand Broly's great secret. I already understand it. No one in all of this reality can defeat Zeno-sama, since he's the sovereign of this reality, which makes him immutable to everything created in this reality and can erase everything that exists in this reality. But you, although you were technically born in this reality, you became completely independent of it after absorbing the laws from other realities and creating your own. That's why you were able to affect Zeno-sama of the future and you are immune to his erasing. Zeno-sama is the game master of the Dragon Ball reality, so he can do whatever he wants with his code and his code can't do anything against him. However, the character Broly, without anyone noticing, became independent from his original code and after devouring other games, modifying himself and creating his own game, becoming another game master. And later, he introduced himself into Zeno's game as if he were a virus too. Bingo! You understand quickly, Daishinkan, said Broly, who even applauded this interruption. He had several videos prepared in case no one understood that point, but he was glad that wasn't necessary to use them. I can't believe this is all true. Many times reality surpasses the wildest of our fantasies. Many still didn't understand what was happening and many others who came to understand it still couldn't believe it, but that didn't matter to Broly. If the bosses had understood and accepted it, he shouldn't care too much about the opinion of the plebs. Therefore, he continued with his monologue. The subsequent decades didn't have much relevance in my plan. I just kept training and working so that everything continued as planned. I sat down with the best woman in the world with whom I have had 2 children and I plan to continue having, and I made great friends. Which I help from time to time to solve their problems and making them better than they could be, even Vegeta. But above all, I got in touch with Goku, my perfect unconscious pawn, for my future plan. He hadn't messed with me for a long time. I was beginning to miss it, said Vegeta, with sense of humor and sarcasm. My dad an unconscious pawn? Said Gohan, very worried upon hearing those terms directed from his teacher to his dad. Pawn? What's that? Asked Goku, who doesn't know what chess is. And without caring about the opinions and questions of his friends, especially Goku's, Broly finally reached the climax of his monologue in short. I continued living my life. Until a certain predestined event moved my plans again. And that was the awakening of Beerus. What? Beerus yelled, sensing like all the other gods, that he was once again the epicenter of every problem. After Beerus' cry of outrage, surprise, and fear, Broly continued explaining the most recent part of his plan. While you were sleeping, I implanted in your mind a certain prophecy about a supposed Super Saiyan God. That's a lie, but if they think it was me too, I became even more evil in their minds. And like an idiot you fell into my trap, with which I obtained the perfect revenge against you for what you did to me in my childhood and thereby unleashing all the events that have led us here, said Broly, this time projecting the brutal beating he gave to Beerus on Bulma's birthday. Although this time no one dared to make fun of Beerus, any of them could have been destroyed by that monster at that time. You have continued taking revenge on me since then. Especially these last days. Son of a bitch. Said Beerus, extremely angry for being mentally in this way years ago. However, nothing surpassed anger caused by the humiliation had put him through the last hours. And trying to contain his laughter as he remembered how Beerus was forced to shit in the litter box, Broly continued explaining his evil plan. With this I re-established my contact with Whis, that as I planned encouraged, he adopted Vegeta, Ginger, Yam and especially Goku as trainees to motivate and help Beerus in his training and have some substitute Hakaishin when the official one is sleeping. Therefore they spend practically all their time on your planet training. Then I just needed Kampa to knock on Beerus's door with his Super Dragon Balls to propose a tournament between universes for the Super Dragon Balls. I knew that Beerus wouldn't like the idea, but that Goku would do everything possible to make this tournament possible, and in the end Beerus would accept. However, Kampa couldn't take it anymore. How? What? He couldn't accept this bullshit. He couldn't accept that Broly had been controlling everything and everyone since the beginning. How could you know all that? It's impo. Please Kampa, at this point do you dare to use the word impossible in front of me? Tell me. How did you know that Super Dragon Balls existed in the first place? Said Broly laughing maliciously, as if he were a fucking bastard who was trying to make a 5-year-old boy understand that Santa Claus are his parents with logic and solid evidence. This? A son of a bitch who enjoys watching how that child sank into despair as he tried to deny an obvious reality that was impossible for him to deny. You discovered it thanks to my trip to your universe, right? An abnormal son of Satan who also enjoyed seeing that boy suffering by explaining that his parents would divorce in a few weeks, that he's adopted and had terminal cancer. And how did you come up with the idea for the tournament? Do the recent martial arts tournaments that are organized on planet Sarada in your universe have something to do with it? Who do you think came up with the idea for those tournaments and why? Didn't it seem suspicious that whenever you turned on the television the first thing you saw were always these tournaments? And who do you think has been subliminally conditioning you to choose that option from the many that exist to challenge your brother? Partly a lie, but that way I seem even better than Aizen. Tell me Kampa, what shampoo are you using recently? The one who sponsors the tournaments and who happens to be one of my companies? No, it's impossible. This cannot be like this. My decisions are mine alone. He was experiencing a terrifying fear. The unspeakable fear of finding out that your free will, ideas, and decisions aren't yours in the first place. The fear of discovering that your life is being ruled by others without even being forced, not even knowing that you are a slave in the hands of others. The fear of knowing that you don't even have control over your own mind and decisions, that everything was already decided before you knew you had to make a choice. Yes, of course they are your own destinies. In the same way that it was also the decision of the bored and childish Zeno to observe the tournament to kill time. Was also Zeno's own decision to go see you and scold you for not doing your job. Was also Goku's decision to propose this tournament to Zeno. Was also Zeno's decision to befriend Goku, a pure person like him and with practically the same metal age. It was also Zeno's decision to give Goku many privileges and means at his disposal. I just made sure you make these decisions freely, just as I wanted you to do, said Broly with such a wicked, sadistic and creepy smile that even the angels feel chills all over their body, including the staff. Everything, he had manipulated everything and everyone, including Zeno even before seeing him for the first time. Scary, he's very scary, shouted Zeno, who was clinging like a scared panda cub to the legs of his guards and caretakers. Broly. You are diabolical, said Piccolo, the ex-demon king and one of the most smart characters of this franchise. However, after hearing that, he believed that he had the intelligence level of a Goku in comparison. None of them in their long lives had met such a manipulative sociopath as Broly. And Wise, who was already smearing as the story continued, came forward and asked, so in the tournament between the Universe 6 and 7. Did you make only Goku fight so that Zamasu would become obsessed with him later? No. Broly-sensei, tell me that isn't true, said Gohan with great agony. One thing is manipulate the gods, that was wrong, but it's something more or less understandable. However, manipulate and use your friends like pawns in a sordid and evil plan is another thing. Broly, his teacher, his daughter godfather along with Piccolo, his business partner and bowling teammate couldn't be able to cross that line. But unfortunately Broly disappointed his student, it was exactly what had happened, that's right. I knew that later on, the useless Shin would meet Zamasu, since as with Kampa I would manipulate him to do it, and that Shin would mention Goku and his exploits. Why Goku and not me? Because I conditioned him to do it, and in the event that he didn't do it I would just mentally control him. I always have bodies observing each one of you, although as I demonstrated in the test combat it's impossible to detect me. Son of a bitch! Shouted all the gods and angels while looking at their back, where intermittently they could see many Brolys stalking them and that once again they became completely undetectable and untouchable. Some insults that were like heavenly music in Broly's ears, which continued to explain how everyone had danced on the palm of his hand until now. I also knew that someone, maybe me, would upload and GodTube the entire tournament with the Super Dragon Ball in the background. And that someone, maybe Zamasu, would watch that video after investigating Goku and would start asking questions about the Super Dragon Balls, the time rings, and start making evil plans not as good as mine. And that would lead us in one direction. The creation of a new time ring of which I would be seemingly innocent. Why would you want to create another timeline where? A timeline where I also existed? What would you say if all of my selves on all timelines were exactly the same person and the same mind, but on different timelines? Wise, said Broly, interrupting this question as if he were Joseph Joestar to propose the correct answer. That's impossible? Why? Because none of you, not even Daishinkan and Zeno, can? It's very possible for me, although isn't very important. It wasn't a necessary step for my plan but helped me a bit. I have many other means to conquer the other timelines at the same time, said Broly, this time interrupting his answer to advance the goal of this complicated plan. A goal that, although predictable at this point, was nonetheless less surprising and terrifying, therefore everyone shouted, what? Conquer. The important thing was to create the ideal situation in which Goku used the button that Zeno gave him to summon him and thus completely destroy the entire timeline. Something quite easy, especially because this situation was extremely similar to one that I implanted in his head with a very long illusion decades ago on the planet Namek. Does anyone still believe that I am taking advantage of fortunate coincidences? Everything is marked with my name here, said Broly while showing the similarities between the Tsukiyomi that he used with Goku on planet Namek and the events that occurred in Trunks' timeline. No way. Almost all sighed stunned when comparing one movie and another. They were practically the same and he could anticipate this many years after. Not even Goku, the main victim in this plot, couldn't be angry, just amazed. Wow. He was able to predict even this. Incredible. And that created the perfect opportunity to be left alone with a completely helpless and unsupervised Zeno in my hands, whom I made my vassal. Vassal that later Goku, as I planned, brought him here as a good Trojan horse so that one day, just at the right moment when Goku was going to ask about the tournament, my Zeno would propose to the other Zeno to destroy many universes. And between that idea and the other, this tournament would arise. Tournament in which I am announcing to everyone right now my great plan to take over everything, said Broly, finally ending the long movie of his long plan in which there are no extra scenes like in Marvel. PLAF. 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 A movie ending that only future Zeno applauded. The others were too stunned, confused, disgusted, outraged, or scared to respond positively. Any questions? Raise your hand and I'll answer, said Broly, who asked the public as it's done in all the movies in the preview. And the first question was to Vados, your turn. What about your time look that makes time travels to the future impossible? How did you do it? Asked Vados, who wanted to finally know the answer to the greatest mystery they had found for years. It was already clear that the culprit is Broly, however, no one knew how he had made it possible. Interesting question. Let's say that it's a combination of several of my abilities and that I am using a special machine in the office of a very lazy god that allows me to alter in a certain way this reality beyond the time and space. Such an incredible and paradoxical machine that not only brought me to this timeline without modifying it, has also allowed me to modify the time laws of this reality even before I used the machine. Broly said, showing images of Avalon's office, an office that he had taken over for many years thanks to his picaresque, and that Avalon is useless. Moreover, as always used to be the case with time travel and temporal paradoxes, that explanation created many questions and doubts among the public. This means that who manipulated the laws of time travels either in the past, present and future was the Broly of the future. Right? Asked Vegeta to Gohan, the most intelligent person here, to check if he had understood everything correctly. It seems like this. He surely did it so that no one would know what the current Broly was planning to do, answered Gohan, explaining what was more than obvious this time. Is something like that possible? I mean, he manipulated our reality even before using that machine. Asked Shin, that until now believed that temporary paradoxes like these were impossible in this reality. Normally I would say no. But I don't know what to believe anymore, answered Wise, who like everyone else could only believe that something like that was possible even without knowing its operation. The evidence was overwhelming. However, these weren't questions directed towards Broly, only gossip between friends and acquaintances. Someone had raised his hand to ask, therefore Broly gave him the floor. Your turn, Daishinkan. What do you mean when you say that? You have come to take over everything? Asked Daishinkan without moving from the side of Zeno and his guards, but putting great pressure on Broly, the greatest enemy they have ever faced. However, Broly didn't feel affected from his chair, so he calmly answered while stroking his evil, stuffed Beerus cat exactly how it sounds. In a few minutes I will be your new boss and all this reality will join mine. Like every other reality. It's quite simple to understand. Do you really think we're going to let you do it? Said Daishinkan, who raised the platform where he, future Zeno, and their guards were standing to speak at a height above Broly. Please. Do you think I'm a 3/4 villain in a cliché story? Do you really think I'd tell you my plan if there was a 1,000th chance that you could do something to prevent it? This is simply a formalism. A formalism with which I will let all of you witness the emergence of your new supreme god. That's right. Broly had pulled out his huge, powerful, and muscular virile member on the table, splitting it in half, metaphorically, showing who's the fucking boss before all the universes. He's the one. The one that can defeat Hakatians without any problem, the one who had brainwashed the supreme being of their reality, the one who had controlled the actions of all the gods and mortals from the shadows for years, fulfilling all his predictions and plans until now. Powerful, intelligent, persevering, unpredictable, unscrupulous, implacable. These were some of the traits of the person who has stated that they could do nothing to prevent his ascension. So after checking firsthand the means that he has at his disposal and that until now he had managed to carry out all his plans perfectly, the vast majority had no reason to think that this time wouldn't be different. Are he serious? Can't we do anything against him? Asked Jiren to Belmod, since he was worried that the reward that the Hakatian of Universe 11 had promised him if he won the tournament wouldn't be given if they don't defeat that monster before. A monster that was even intimidating the apathetic and arrogant Jiren. He has brainwashed the invincible Zeno-sama. And Broly can order him to erase us at any time. If not even Zeno-sama can fight him, I doubt that we will be able to do something to him. Not even your Jiren. Answered Belmod, recognizing that the chances of beating Broly, especially for them, was practically nil, but without the practically. This wasn't just Belmod's opinion, all the people who had witnessed the life of Broly with all his exploits thought the same. What was the point of fighting him when even Zeno-sama could do anything but cry and hide behind his nannies? It was like Broly said, there was nothing they could do against him. Broly's strategy worked, as he predicted, by declaring that he had already won. He won the battle before starting it by completely demoralizing the adversary. However, he failed to do it with Daishinkan, who saw through Broly's strategies. The reason why you were able to defeat Zeno-sama was because Zeno-sama has no fighting power. He's simply invincible and omnipotent before anything of this reality. You are immune to Zeno's abilities, but not to the fighting power of the people of this reality. I'm wrong? You are quite insightful. I'm glad that you noticed. If everyone had been scared in their chairs, my takeover would have been very boring. Wahahaha. Broly answered, showing excitement and satisfaction upon seeing that finally someone had been able to spoil a small part of his plan after so long. Other villains would have annoyed or even freaked out in this situation, but it wasn't the case with Broly. After all, his favorite setting was the one where his prey showed resistance. I see, said Wise and his other brothers and sisters upon hearing his father deduction and Broly answer. Only because his absolute method worked against Zeno-sama didn't mean that also worked with them, they could still win even if Broly denied it. And not only the tensions understood that, all the universes had regained some confidence upon hearing that Broly wasn't invincible. He was only extremely strong and had one of the supreme beings on his side, but there was still a chance to win. Hakations, eliminate this multiversal threat, Daishinkan said, ordering his slaves to carry out a suicide attack. As any military strategist without empathy or scruples would do when facing a totally unknown enemy, he sent the most expendable soldiers that would have a chance to reveal some of the enemy's cards up his sleeve and thus get some information for his next move. Many of them could die, maybe all of them, but it's a sacrifice that Daishinkan was willing to make. And as used to be the case, many idiotic soldiers charged without question knowing or not knowing that they were launching themselves against death itself, partly because otherwise Daishinkan or Zeno would kill them. Great, I was already tired of his voice, shouted Quatella, leading the attack with his co-workers Halaze, Mule, Sidra, Rumshi. No. Idiots. Don't fight against that thing. Shouted Beerus and Kompa, the only Hakations summoned to the tournament who for obvious reasons hadn't attacked with their co-works. Well, not the only ones, Belmod prudently stood long range, pretending to be preparing an energy attack. However, it was too late to stop them, specifically the rat god, Quatella, who charged against Broly, still sitting in his premium chair, with a very strange but characteristic motivation. If I show off Zeno-sama and Daishinkan may decide to save my universe even if the tournament is not held. While Beerus and his irritating universes will disappear for sure. Ha. Quatella was finally behind Broly, who was still looking defiantly at Daishinkan, without being daunted despite the fact that he was about to receive a Hakai attack on the back of his neck. Di. Zawarudo. Palm. 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 However, contrary to his expectations, he couldn't see Broly's neck being destined, since before he could perform the guild's characteristic ability he felt as if he had been hit thousands of times in all parts of the body at the same time. Plump. Crash. Seconds later, after crashing into the bleachers where he hadn't been able to sit until now, he looked towards Broly's chair, which was much further away than ever for him, and behind Broly a quirky golden long-haired character dressed in a long white tunic with a white cape and white chaps with a gold trim, adorned with gold knee pads, gold boots and a belt with a D with the chest covered with a white tank top and Egyptian-style necklace bearing another D, looked at him from above with contempt. "Who the hell are you?" asked Quatella to the strange and unknown person who seemed to be the culprit of the pain he felt while wiping the blood from his rat whiskers. "Kono Dioda." said Heaven Ascension Dio, who came out to greet the first because Broly wanted to premiere this tournament with a classic meme. Okay, this spontaneous is called Dio, is strong, fast, weird, and obviously he's on the side of Broly, and although no one knew his origin or how he had reached this dimension, it was clear that he's an enemy. Don't stop. Let's attack at the same time, shouted Sidra, indicating to their co-workers that it was they should not ask unnecessary questions, they simply had to destroy another enemy, after all they had the numerical advantage. Or, that's what they believed. Gourmet Slamp. Fresh. Meteor. Shimmer Tensei. Almighty. Since at the moment in which they launched against Broly and Dio, once again they were attacked from all directions by unknown enemies, who even attacked Belmod, still in the stance pretending be about to attack Broly. Plash. Boom. Boom. Kaboom. Slash. In this way, like Quatella, more wounded Haitians looked from the stands the faces of their attackers, and just like happened with Dio, completely unknown individuals with immense power comparable to that of a Haitian gathered around Broly. Who the hell are these people? Compa screamed as he saw how these unknown enemies had beaten fellow Haitian more fit than him. Now they didn't just have to fight Broly in a suicidal way? They had to fight in a suicidal way against Broly and also other monsters that could stand up to them? Besides, where did Broly get these people from? How is it possible that no one knows absolutely anything about those monsters? And although no one there knew the origin of these warriors, Goku did recognize someone among them, Acacia. And the others must be other friends of Broly, they seem very strong. These skills. They look like Broly's. Beerus said, who could see those strangers perform strange abilities that he had only seen Broly use. Therefore, he couldn't help but wonder. Did these guys get these abilities thanks to Broly, or was the other way around? And as always, Whis and Vados couldn't overlook a certain detail, and this was specifically on the forehead of all the royal guards of Broly. That mark on the forehead is the same as Zeno's. Not much explanation was needed about it. Broly wasn't a final boss who acted alone, like the other final bosses. He had an army that would fight for him. I present my team. Team, I present to you the new future team members, Broly said, pointing to the participants from all the universes, Haitians, Kaiashins, and Tenshins, while FIU. 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 More and more characters appeared near Broly. Obito, Orochimaru, Kabuto, Kamaga, Najimi, Pucci, Kars, Valentine, Midora, Jiraiya, Ichiryu, Bu, Zamasu, Frieza, Frost, Hit, and many other. In a few seconds, the sky was covered with known and unknown to some people. All of them loyal followers of Broly with the mark of the third eye on their forehead. That obviously made the Daishinkan side nervous upon realizing that their numerical superiority had lost value against Broly's army, which despite being less numerous had better quality. And not only that, some of the members of Broly's army managed to demoralize part of the deities with just their presence. Ah! Bu. Other Bu. Dabura. Zamasu. Moro. What are they doing here? Shouted Shin, feeling like he was living a nightmare within another nightmare after another. Frieza, this motherfucker is still alive? This Broly doesn't waste resources. Well, that's better for me, said Vegeta, who saw at this moment an opportunity to kill Frieza personally and thus take revenge. There are other familiar faces among them, said Krillin, also saw among them people who attended Broly's wedding, and that made him think how pathetic that was. Broly had to force his lackeys to pretend they were his friends. They all seem to have gotten stronger, shouted Goku, very excited. Upon sensing the power of Frieza, he seemed to be as strong as him. And even stranger things, especially for the poor Compa, upon realizing that his best fighter wasn't in his side anymore. Damn Broly. Since when Hit works for you? You are a son of a bitch. There are too many, and all of them seems very strong, said all the Haitians and even some Tenshins upon sensing the strange power of Broly's army. His army, made up of people kidnapped from their realities, finally appeared in the Dragon Ball multiverse. Everyone was stunned and confused by what was happening once again. No one expected Broly to have so many powerful and enigmatic people under his command. And of course, Broly made a small introduction and explanation about his boys and girls. This is my infinite legion. Although many of them were already extremely strong in their realities, even if we compare them with his one, I improved them with training, magic, biotechnology, and motivational sessions from different realities, among them this on, the infinite energy generator of Maki Jero, and my Bulma fitted perfectly with everyone. Does anyone else have a question? Why are you doing all this? Asked Wise, who like all universes wanted to know the real motivation behind this meticulous and ambitious plan. Did he lie to them a year ago, when he said he didn't want to dominate all the universes, like Zamsu wanted? Most likely yes. Why am I doing it? Whis, I think I already explained it very clearly a year ago. I just hate that there are things above me. Be it social laws, physical laws, metaphysical laws, humans, gods, or whatever. Did you think that you, your brothers, your father, and the dwarf were exempt? Unlike you, I have ambitions, answered Broly, who believed to explain something as simple as that 2 plus 2 add up to 4, but nevertheless, he had in front of him supposedly intelligent people who were unable to understand something so simple. Instead, the only thing they could think about his speech was, he's crazy. He had been pretending his whole life to achieve this. For that reason, they couldn't think of another word to define him. Broly-sensei. And what about Bulma, what about Bra and me, everyone? Have we also been just pawns in your game, to get everything? Everything up to now has been a lie. Ached Gohan with an indescribable pain in his heart. Practically, since he had memory, Broly had always been with him. He had possibly been the person who had most influenced him, either on his way as a martial artist, as a scientist, as an entrepreneur, as a food critic, and even as a person. Even more than his own parents. And not only he had changed his life, but all of them, something perfectly verifiable with Trunks' testimony. However, as everything seemed to be, was everything Gohan had ever lived with him a sham? Had all of them just been a procedure to achieve this goal? Except for hiding my true identity, and this plan, everything has been true. I married Bulma because I love her madly, and I had a daughter and son with her who I also love madly. I adopted you as a disciple because I really care about you and I wanted the best for you. And everything that I have helped you, all the barbecues that I have organized with everyone. Everything was and will continue to be that way. It's because I really care about all you, even Vegeta. Answered Broly while wiping Gohan's tears with telekinesis, who couldn't help crying as he asked his teacher and listened to his answer. However, if all that was true, Gohan still didn't understand certain things, then why? Do you think I'm not doing this in part for you? Shouted Broly, interrupting Gohan's moralistic question to then speak to all the universes, for all of you. What? For us? He's crazier than I thought. Shouted several gods and mortals upon hear that nonsense. This guy said he wanted to conquer their universities for some kind of complex, and now he said that he does it for their good? They had never met someone so demagogue, and that taking into account that unfortunately there are politicians in all universes. However, all those politicians were amateurs compared to Broly. Think about it. Can you really live comfortably living in a multiverse ruled by him? Said Broly, pointing to the scared Zeno. Do you really want to be ruled by a subnormal and almighty Stewie who at any moment on a whim can decide to destroy 8 universes at once? He has already destroyed universes before, he wants to destroy them now, and nothing prevents him from doing so even if you win this tournament. You really want to live knowing that at any moment he can eliminate you and your families without leaving a trace. This speech undoubtedly overwhelmed the minds and hearts of all mortals and native gods of the universes. Broly have a great point. What were they doing here in the first place? Fight each other to decide who wouldn't be erased from existence. Why should they defend those who wanted to kill them if someone with great probability of overthrowing them appeared? That would be stupid. And seeing that the iron was hot, Broly struck again with his diabolical tongue. Wouldn't you be better off under the care of someone like me? Someone who doesn't destroy universes, and all he does is create wealth wherever he goes? That's right. Until now everyone believed that the only possible way was to obey Zeno and Daishinkan, so they didn't even think about this possibility. However, if Broly could replace them, wouldn't it be better for all of them? Perhaps they were in front of the only opportunity to improve their lives. After all, Broly couldn't be worse than Zeno. However, and let me guess. Will you kill anyone who tries to prevent your much-deserved promotion? Said Daishinkan, asking that question with double intentions. On the one hand, he wanted to show all those who were seriously thinking about siding with Broly that this supposed savior was actually a tyrant like them, and on the other hand, he wanted to remind all those who decide to ally with Broly about the consequences of committing treason. No, of course not. I won't kill anyone or retaliate against those who have decided to defend the position of their little tyrant. After all, if they don't fight by your side you and the dwarf will kill them while I try to get everything, or in the impossible case I fail. I understand their concern. After all, most of them are hostages. Unlike you, I value people's lives. You can fight against me and my army, don't worry, no one of you will die, said Broly, showing to be much more magnanimous than the current leaders of this reality. This Broly. On the one hand, he manipulates us into taking his side, and moments later, he encourages us to fight against him. He likes wicked games. Belmod said, increasingly impressed with who he wanted to be his new boss. He could have encouraged them more to definitely side and fight for him, or he could have said absolutely nothing for both sides to fight each other to survive. However, he wanted both options at the same time. He wanted both sides to fight each other in his favor, and he had practically succeeded, at least on the part of the native habitats. Without a doubt, he had a twisted and greedy mind. And how do you plan to own everything if it can be known? Doing the same thing that you have done to future Zeno-sama to Zeno-sama? Will you do the same with everyone? Daishinkan said, deftly trying to discourage other universes from aligning with Broly, even if they finally end up fighting against Broly army, as he was encouraging. And Broly answered without caring about the attempts of his rival, in part, but not with all of you. However, let's stop talking for the moment, you will find out later. For now, let's enjoy the tournament between my reality and your reality. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kaioshin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my P at Trian. Many thanks to my awesome patrons. Ben Phillips, Yami Tancho, Harold Martinsons, Kenny Nielsen. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll be here until next time.